You found your way to Blood Moon Radio. I'm Coraley, and this is where we follow the threads the world wants us to drop. Today I'm joined by former professional dancer, choreographer, and author Alexandra Beller. In part one of this two-part episode, we delve into modern motherhood and what we miss professionally, personally, and as members of society when we accept the limited perceptions of the status quo. We also touch on philosophic ground, questioning whether the patriarchy actually exists without our engaging with it, and acknowledging the existential aloneness of the human experience. This conversation is rooted in the role of creative process, embodied awareness, and the ways we experience the spiritual without seeking systems. Welcome to part one of Embodying Empress. Welcome to another episode of Blood Moon Radio. Today I am joined by Alexandra Beller. She is an artist, choreographer, author, and educator who works at the intersection of dance, theater, and somatics. She is both trained in and offers classes in Le Bon Movement Analysis and Bartuniev Fundamentals. And she is joining us today from Brooklyn, New York. How are you today, Alexandra?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. I am excited for this conversation. I have been out of touch with my dance self for a while now. And something that I've been thinking about is, or not even thinking about, I know I'm drawn to and it's a need, is getting back into movement. There's something about your work that feels very aligned with themes that this season of the podcast has been exploring. In particular, the concepts of honoring voice, intuition, creativity, and the self. Your work calls others to access their creativity, embody clarity, and find their voice. And I'd love it if we could start by talking about your own relationship with those things.
So, embodied clarity, what does that mean? Embodiment to me means that I'm listening to what the body knows before I'm listening to an outside metric, an outside voice, expectation, including the conditioning that it has put inside my head. So I'm listening to what my body says, even if I can't totally articulate it or name it, but I'm like, something is happening, I'm feeling something. I don't always think we have to put that into words. Clarity, though, I think is being able to decipher what the body, so embodiment, listening to the body's information, embodied clarity, being able to have a real articulate conversation with the body. And that is something that I do think is a skill we can build through practice. That I think is a precursor to finding your voice and creativity, because if this is the vehicle and vessel I'm using for articulating to the world, I need to have a handle on how to have a conversation with it that feels generative and fertile.
Your company used to be a performance and education company, but you've shifted into a space where creators can support their artistic growth as well as their emotional and physical well-being. What brought about that change in your work?
The biggest thing was that I shifted into choreographing for theater. So for a long time, 16 years, I ran a dance company and I was the lead artist really in that company. So I was the director choreographer and I was creating original devised work. So I would come up with an idea and I would gather my group together and book rehearsals and create this piece and then present it, which also came with a lot of parts of the job that I really did not like doing and wasn't well suited for, including fundraising and admin stuff. And then I started choreographing for theater, meaning I was being brought into somebody else's project. I didn't say, I want to do Two Gentlemen of Verona. Somebody was doing it and said, we need a movement director, a choreographer, and started hiring me for that. And that became the mainstay of my choreography career. And then I also go into universities and make work on students fairly regularly. Because I stopped wanting to devise work for my own company, the education part of it and mentorship part of it really had space to fill that vacuum. So with my creative life fairly sated by theater and university work, the company just kind of filled in the empty space where that was. And I started creating more content, and that also, like, the pandemic happened not that long after that decision. So then I started doing more online work and creating more digital content around creativity and supporting artists.
The pandemic comes up a lot on the podcast, and I think that section of my life is so blurry, but the first time someone said it, I was like, it would be interesting if we're still around to see what they say about it years and years from now, because it's such a life shifting event. And I think it's changed the trajectory of a lot of what's gone on in the world since. Definitely, in my opinion, it's increased divisiveness and led particularly the US, I think, to a space I wasn't imagining it going.
And then as a mom of two kids, I can say that watching the developmental shift in both of my children, who are 5 years apart, so I saw two pretty different developmental journeys, and it really shifted their path.
Yeah. I have 3 children, and I would agree. I think even thinking back, my youngest didn't have birthday parties because you couldn't have people over. And then her first birthday party that we could have people over was such a huge moment for her. And I was like, it's interesting. I mean, I guess I'm always observing how our perception affects everything, but that is something I would not have even thought about before. And then it shifted my view of it and what it means to kids, or how she's going to metabolize that as she grows up. How much is it going to affect her, especially because children internalize so much. Mm-hmm. They're less aware of everything on the outside of the world. They just see their immediate bubbles, reactions, and often they relate that back to themselves. And so the work of a parent is trying to help them not internalize things that might have nothing to do with them, which is where I come up against a lot of my own, like, oh, wait, I do this.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I was just having a conversation with my 14-year-old about changing the kind of stability mobility relationship that he has around his own value and worth, because right now I feel like, understandably, naturally, he's taking a lot of his sense of value and identity off of how people respond to him. And of course, this is something that's also, a generational shift, because I grew up without the internet, certainly without social media. So the whole likes thing, it was not, an option. And of course, we still, in the teen movies and John Hughes movies of our childhood or mine, certainly, you can see that there still was this ecosystem around other people giving you value, but it wasn't like it is now. So my teen and I were having this conversation about what is required to take some of the weight that you're leaning into other people for your value and bring it back onto your own axis. What is required to do that? And one thing that I was saying to him is it's unfortunate. It's a really scary moment, because you can't really build up that more axial, self-determined value without letting go of the other. You can't kind of fade them very well. You have to really say, that's not where I'm taking my sense of self from. And now I have no sense of self. And I have to build it up from this void. And that's a really scary place to be, that I'm asking semi-developed brain to do.
My oldest is also 14, and that's a huge thing with social media, I think. I think as humans, or in my experience anyway, getting to that place where you place less value on outside opinion is hard work. We're not socialized for it. If you were brought up with people using shame or what they need you to do or want you to do to be acceptable, you carry so much of that, and unpacking that over your adult life is tremendous work. And the pressure on youth today, growing up with this amplified version because they're on apps, because of the internet, social media is huge.
And then at the same time, as I'm listening to you and kind of thinking about what they're exposed to, there is more pressure. And then also I feel like the what we were exposed to as the standard of reference for us was much more homogenous. They have a lot more possibilities now. They see more possibilities in gender expression and political expression, for better or for worse. But I do feel like I grew up with a pretty static single image of there's two genders, and this is what a man is, and this is what a woman is, and that's it. And maybe you had your geeks and jocks and nerds, but I feel like there were 4 or 5 stereotypes, and that's it. Choose one. Which are you? Which, even at the beginning of Sex and the City, I still feel like we were, there are these 4 types of women, and which one are you?
Yeah.
And they were all quite feminized and sexualized. So even within those 4 quote unquote types, we were really still in one archetype.
And that is a good thing about social media and internet, is that they are exposed to other ways of being, which I think is so key. When I look at, because the town I live in is quite small, but it was much smaller when I was young. It's a very Caucasian, very small town. If I look at someone even like my dad, for example, he's very smart, but he and I are very different in that when I was a kid, for whatever reason, whether it's because I read a lot, whether it's because I've always intuitively felt those witchy things like animism, the connection to everything has value. I always intuitively felt that very strongly. So I would argue with people in my family. But my dad would perpetuate these stereotypes or racist or homophobic things because that's what he was exposed to. He'd never thought outside of those. He'd never, and he's highly empathetic too, but I remember him telling me a story about a family that was in town. They were Japanese, and he would talk about how the guy, his friend, didn't care if people referred to him using a racial slur. And I was like, it's not that he doesn't care. How have you never thought about this? It's that he's in a town full of white people. And if he stands up for himself or says, oh, this hurts me, he'll be isolated. Yeah. It's your job to stand up for him, not to be like, oh, he's so chill. Everybody should be like that. No person owes you their discomfort so that you can.
Right. I also can hit my kids. They don't seem to complain. So I guess I'm okay.
And people don't, for some reason. If they're in a bubble, they don't think outside. Some do. I did. But I think it's more rare to behave that way. I think we're at our core, and this touches on what we're talking about with social media. We want acceptance and connection. And so often in our society anyway, that leads to stepping away from our authenticity to fit in, or just not bothering to look outside, even if it feels wrong.
Yeah, and I definitely have clients who are recovering people pleasers, and this comes up frequently. And of course, our work together is to have them form a more solid sense of boundaries and worth so that they don't, do that. And some of the work is also for them to be able to recognize when they're in relationships with people who will take as much as they can get. Well, if you're gonna clean the whole house to make sure I'm not disappointed in you, I'm not gonna stop you. And I am in a romantic partnership with a recovering people pleaser. And I do work to make sure that he doesn't overgive and that he doesn't overfunction. And I do make sure that I don't like bring up needs without caveating it. Like, I don't want you to solve this for me. I don't need you to do this for me. I'm just saying this out loud because I need to get it off my brain. I need you to not try to pick this up for me. But I do think it is a responsibility that we have, especially when we're in close or loving relationships with people, to take on a little bit of that. It doesn't mean it's our job. They should be doing their own work. I think it's a real act of love and service to recognize when people around you need a little bit more strength or tone to their field of energy or their boundaries or their functioning, and to offer it.
I think a healthy reciprocal relationship really does walk the line between us taking stock of ourselves and looking at where our responsibilities lie, but also bothering to support, not in the ways that our ego might tell us, I'm going to fix this for this person, or if they don't do the work after I do this, that's it. I did have a disagreement with a good friend I've known for years about this subject of, it's not my job to fix it for them or to judge and then step away because they're not in line. When you love someone, your role is to allow them to do their work, but be mindful of your work and your role and how can you positively support, not. I just think we get so much performative or controlling in disguise behavior. You know, you can change around spiritual or psychological language to suit it. No.
Yeah, I also feel like there's something a little bit, no, misleading about the word job in that sentence. No, it's not your job. Do you only do things in your close relationships that are your job, or is some part of that relationship about offering and service and extra, right? Especially a close friendship or familial relationship or love relationship. I do plenty of things that I don't think are my job. You know, doing your job is like, what are the expectations of you? What feels like a failure to provide or produce if you haven't done it?
Yeah.
What makes things fall apart? That's not all I'm doing in my relationships, though.
Yeah.
I'm showing up in a symbiotic ecosystem in which there's a lot more subtlety than there is in a job. A relationship is not a job. And
Yeah.
I actually don't feel like in a friendship I have a job.
No.
So, no, it's not my job. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean that I don't feel compelled to, interact in that way.
And some of the things that we're touching on, subtle shifts in perception or how do we treat others, if we turn that inward and talk about relationship to body, when I danced, I absolutely had the ability to propriocept or kinesthetically be aware to a high level. I could identify minute adjustments and make them in order to refine my technique or to deliver a certain quality of movement. But if I look back now as to how I viewed my body, despite having real depth to my awareness of it, I think I wasn't understanding it as something that I would necessarily listen to. And when you talk about the shift in your work from just dance to working with people to these deeper levels, when did you first start to understand that the body was something to listen to, not to shape or control, as it often is viewed in the dance world?
Well, I think in some ways I was lucky. It won't necessarily sound that way because the luck was maybe in the silver lining category, but I never fit into the expectations of a dancer, especially a female identifying dancer, because I wasn't thin. And I wasn't especially virtuosic. I mean, I did fine, certainly good enough to get into a big touring dance company. So I had chops, but I wasn't a competition dancer. I grew up in New York and I was at amazing studios, got great training. That training was not oriented towards how many turns can you do, how high is your leg, how long can you hold it in the air, these kind of competition-based metrics that people are so excited about on shows like So You Think You Can Dance. Oh my God, that tilt or that split or that jump, or which is fine. People value what they want to value. That was never the point of dance for me. And I think that because I didn't get validated for those things and often got ignored because my body was not what they felt would be a body that had a future in dance, I got left to my own devices quite a bit. So that gave me time to have my own sense of what I cared about and sit with feeling more. I think I also just am not, by nature, a very, what is the word I want to use? Because what I want to say is I was not aspirational. That's not really true. I certainly had like lots of excitement towards things. But I just wasn't a joiner. I never wanted to read the book that was at the top of the bestseller list. I would read it 2 years later. I never wanted to watch the show everyone was talking about. I never wanted to wear the clothes that everybody found trendy. Like, something about it was kind of upsetting to me and felt like I became invisible. And I'm not touting that as better than being somebody who's excited by the zeitgeist. I think there can be a lot of bonding and sense of belonging that people get from joining. But in general, I was never a joiner, including religion or ideologies, or, I wanted my own. Yep. And that was very important to me. So I think also I wasn't really primed to agree and adopt these outside metrics and values that the dance world had, which left me a lot of space to interocept, feel the inside of myself, and just explore what felt natural and exciting and expressive and personal to me.
I think people don't understand in the dance world exactly how much body typing goes on. I can remember being at a teacher certification training, and there was a whole section where they were training us to identify body types. They had dancers come in to show the body types. And so when they're they talked about training them differently. So the dancer is standing there who's the C body type, the not dance ideal body type. And the trainer is talking about, this is your workhorse student. They're going to work harder than any. What? She was amazing. Her technique was amazing. But she is standing there with a group of teachers. I don't know how many of us there were. And I was horrified. Like, I was like, what are we doing? I don't understand. And so when the AB body type, because A, the ideal ballerina, the Balanchine ideal is so rare, I was really watching because I was like, okay, we're doing a combination across the floor. The difference is she's just bigger. She's doing her technique is amazing. She's not lacking extension. She's not lacking lift in her. It was a jazz training. You're not lacking lift in any of her jumps. That particular method is very heavy on the fancy things, the switch splits, the multiple turns. She's doing it all. She's doing freaking fouettes. I don't know. What are you expecting? And she's not doing it looking like a dancer who's like, oh, this is my dancer who works hard, but they're never going to go anywhere. But that's the messaging she's receiving about herself, that adults in the room are openly giving her in front of an audience. Yeah. And that if those teachers don't think beyond that, if they don't question it, are taking back into their trainings, like subtly giving children messages about their body and their value, even if you think that you're not overtly putting it out there. And so I don't know that people understand the harm that can come.
And I also think we stick it in this category of like, that's about your body, but there's also the like, so what also aren't you paying attention to that you could be paying attention to that's not about body, right? So when I look back and also I see this in videos of myself when I was young, and then when I feel back in my own like embodied memory, I'm like, oh my God, what a dancer I was at 12 in those classes. I think I was probably the only one or one of the only ones who was like so present, so passionate, so expressive, so just like, there I am. I am transparent and unapologetic and brave and immediate. And if I were a teacher, and I have been a teacher in this room where I'm like, oh my God, this student is like so amazing. And they've had no training. They were a martial artist, or this is their first dance class. And I go up to them and I'm like, you need to dance. Like, you need to dance. What is happening? You are so beautiful. And I have really had a lot of juiciness in my life by being able to be that teacher for those students who's like, that like a spectacular mover, right? And they're like, oh no, I don't really know all these other people. And I'm like, no, 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 no. No, no, no. You are spectacular. I'm not. There's no question about it. But the harm that I think we often talk about, this harm to body image and self image, and absolutely 100%. And we sometimes don't talk about like what could have happened. Not that they accepted your body. Yes, sure. Great. That would have been great. But what if they had actually seen something in you that would have been a remarkable visibility? And I suspect, and I haven't done a double blind study on it, but like I suspect that a lot of artists that are particularly personal and expressive and present, and all those words I used about myself, also have trauma in their history and in their body, and like could use that visibility even more than some of the other dancers or movers or artists in the room. I know that that was true for me, and that eventually I found a couple teachers over time in little pockets of my life that said those things to me, like, you recognize that you're like spectacular and unique, right? Like you can feel it, right? And truthfully, I could, but I was being fairly universally gaslit that that wasn't true, because they didn't put me in the piece, and they didn't seem to want me on stage, and they didn't want me in the front of the room, and I was never the person who was showing something. And so, that data starts to accumulate in your perception of yourself, and you start putting together a picture of like, maybe this thing that I feel is not true. I mean, I feel so amazing and powerful and special when I dance, and I feel like something's really happening. But I guess it's not visible. I guess other people aren't seeing it. And then every summer from when I was, I think, 12, I went to sleepaway camp for 2 months. And it was just the most miraculous shift in my life and perception. And it wasn't a dance camp, it was like an arts camp. So, not everybody was a dancer, and it wasn't like a conservatory environment or super competitive. So, like, I was the dancer, I was the special one. And I still have relationships with people who are like, oh, yeah, we went to Bucks Rock together, and you were so amazing. And I got all of this love and visibility and attention and validation. And I don't know if I would have kept dancing all year long if I hadn't felt like, oh, it's real. No, it's real. Like, people see it. I just have to be in front of the right people. But clearly, people can feel that something's happening when I dance.
How do you navigate when we're talking about these deeply ingrained biases, and then the world at large, in many ways, amplifying that toxic messaging that comes in the dance world? When you're working with your students to bring out their talents and foster it, and asking them to honor their bodies and express through them when they're getting negative messaging?
Well, I try to go in with this value system quite transparent. And so the things that I'm talking about, the things that I'm validating in the room, lifting up, picking, are this weird gesture they made, or like this really interesting relationship they seem to be having, or some way that they are navigating a biomechanical cue. So, for one thing, like, I have this value system and I'm going in with it. And then when and if I hear this material come back from them about fitting in or meeting some kind of model, which I haven't set and have not been touting, the thing that lately I feel like I've been most excited about is actually not contradicting it, but just giving it less oxygen. And I feel like when younger people are talking to me about these models out in the world around whatever it is, body or gender, technique, virtuosity, I think my approach really is like, how boring. How boring is that? What a waste of energy. And I don't, I'm not shaming them for caring about it right now, but I am saying from my vantage point, I really wish I'd spent less energy on that on what men think of me, what men want from me, what magazines show, how they show female presenting bodies. It's such a boring waste of my energy. I have so many better things to do in this lifetime than care about any of these BS things. And I wish I had figured that out sooner and that I hadn't spent so much time lamenting and trying to change and pursuing. And I really feel about things like the patriarchy. I think racism is different. It's a different animal because it's so entrenched in all of the legislation and systems and ideologies. It's in a different way. It's a different kind of violence than the patriarchy. And the patriarchy is entrenched in all those things as well, but I think it's different from racism, which is less of a mindset. And we have a lot of work to do to unpack ourselves. But with the patriarchy, I've been feeling more and more like you can't fight it. That's the patriarchy's method. No, what would the matriarchy do? How would the matriarchy respond to this problem? Problem is oppression and unequal power dynamics and violence. How would the matriarchy respond? The patriarchy would try to break it. That's not working. How would the matriarchy respond? They'd invite in. They would include. They would take care of.
Yeah.
Right? They would listen. And they would be more nuanced. And they would come from body. And they would include nurturing and pleasure and cycles and listening to the whole system as part of their strategy. And for me, that requires saying, oh, this actually doesn't exist. I mean, the patriarchy is not a thing. It's an idea. And if we don't give it oxygen, it actually doesn't exist. Legislation exists. We need to get Roe v. Wade back on the books. We need to close the wage gap. We need to fix maternal health, especially Black maternal health. We have work to do inside the systems. But as a philosophy, I do think that not giving it oxygen is the best step that we can take.
Coming through my divorce and getting to start the podcast, I was like, you know what? I'm starting with myself. So I will unapologetically dress in sultry clothing because I like how it looks. I will wear my hair wild. Men still think that that's for them. They're still going to send the messages, but I don't dress for anyone else. I think I was probably mid-30s when I looked back at pictures of myself and I could remember, when someone takes a picture, you don't like how it looks when you're younger, or even now, I guess. I don't delete the pictures now that I don't like how they look, because I would look back and I would be like, what was I nitpicking about? And somewhere around my mid-30s, I was like, you're never going to be this age again. Just celebrate you. Yeah. But I do think that the reason that systems or cultures that our society has tried to eradicate or squash down, where dependence doesn't come from those sorts of validations, or where people could be independent, right? If you know how to forage food from the woods, you are not useful to capitalist society, right?
Right.
Have played such a huge role. And the challenge is, even when we start with ourselves, we're fighting against full systems that we're forced to live in, right? I can't just declare that I'm not going to participate in capitalism. I have children to take care of.
Yeah, absolutely. And they are 100% intersectional systems. Racism, misogyny, ableism, and capitalism, they're all intersectional. And we can't just say, I no longer respond to the patriarchy, but I am living in capitalism. Well, capitalism is patriarchal and ableist and racist. So, you are responding to those systems if you're living in capitalism. And there's only so much that mindset and perspective can do. And I feel like it is the absolute best first step to do, because once we've released it from our body, I do feel like I do not dress for the attention of men anymore. And that might look like being in baggy clothes and it might look like being in sexy clothes. There's no aesthetic to not caring what men think about how I look.
Yeah.
But I notice the difference for myself in choices that I'm making and anxiety and just a certain sense of presence and awakeness that I have in the world, letting go of caring about that. And I had a very dramatic journey I had to go through to not care. And I'm not saying I don't care 100%, but it's so much less than it was. And it's such a different feeling inside.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to shift the conversation to meaning making because on the show we talk a lot about people making meaning. Sometimes it's through spirituality, sometimes through creative work, sometimes just through lived experience. And your process feels like it holds a lot of that. Do you see dance, art, and creativity as a way people engage in meaning making?
100%. And then I think it's a quite personal decision. Like as you were starting to set up that question, I was asking myself, well, how would I define meaning in relation to making? Like, does meaning exist and I'm articulating it? Do I have meaning that nobody but me can know and I'm trying to share that meaning? I think that probably comes closer to a definition that I have within the context of art. And I have said before that for me, art making, particularly through the body, is about crafting an articulation of what it feels like for me to be alive in a way that another body and human can feel it, in the hopes that the resonance between those two bodies or systems allows you to feel not alone in the world. That there's this, I think, existential aloneness that we all have because no matter how intimate you are with anybody, we just can never know what it's like to be any other human beings. Why those questions about like, if you could be somebody else for, would you, who would you be, are so tempting and delicious. And I'm like, I want to be my partner and I want to be my kids. And I also want to know what it's like to be this kind of person. And what would that feel like? Kind of, I don't want to do anything bad, but I would be interested in spending a day as a sociopath and being like, what does that feel like? Obviously not wanting to do any kind of actual danger in the world or create harm, but I would be very curious to know what it feels like. And sometimes people act in ways where you're just confounded. Like what must your life feel like that is an action that you took? I can't fathom it, and I'm trying to understand it. And there are plenty of times we can, put ourselves in somebody else's position or feeling or imagine what that would be like. But then there are more times than not that I can't comprehend, and I'm confounded by it. And so this feeling of I'll never know what it's like to be anybody else, and also nobody will ever really know me. And I definitely have quite a few people who I feel like know me very intimately, very well, really get me. Couldn't get me more without being me.
Yeah.
And there's still a huge gap, right?
Yeah.
You couldn't possibly understand me better. And you don't understand me. There are some parts that you just can't understand. We just can't. And I do feel like embodied art is a place, and not only embodied art. I do think, writing can get at this, and music and visual art can get at it. Embodied art gets at it at this animal, visceral level, nervous system level that I think other arts don't always have access to, where when we watch animals interact with each other and we're making up what's happening and we're like, that one is sussing out whether this other one is a danger. And you're watching these two animal bodies have this totally intuitive response system and communication pattern between each other. In that sense, watching animals that are of a species, they feel like they know each other better than we know each other as humans. And I think art is an attempt to get back a little bit of that ability that animals have to be known to each other that I think can be quite a relief. And I think a lot of our organizations, whether it's religion or science or spirituality, are an attempt to do the same thing. Feel like, oh, we're of a thing together. We feel something together. And that attention to something that's outside of us or outside of us reflecting the inside of us, like nature, mycelium, having some kind of awe or treating something as sacred, a group of people looking at that thing. And of course, people do this with religion, but people do it with things that feel more aligned to me as well. And I think most of us that have been in sacred natural environments like the redwoods or the ocean, like, ooh, yeah, there's something here. And I am a part of it if I surrender to it and listen to it, but I'm really shut off from it because of my lifestyle and environment and habitat. I've just literally poured layers of concrete between me and the living energy of the planet. And I'm, as you said, in Brooklyn, I'm walking around predominantly on concrete and steel and marble, when I'm lucky, wood. But even that wood is probably sitting on concrete and steel. And whatever the communication is from the planet to the body is dissociated for me most of the time.
Houseplants.
Houseplants.
Get some houseplants.
But even that in New York, not every space really is generative for them. Like we do have light, but we don't have much direct light. So, like even that, and to be honest, with 2 kids and a freelance career, taking care of anything else just feels like a burden to me. We do have a little tiny patch of garden in the back, and I do take a lot of pleasure in putting things in the soil and watching what happens. And I also put a lot of pressure on myself for their survival that is not always healthy for me. Like, that extra kind of responsibility and feeling of like, I have to make sure that this is okay. And I feel like that about everything. I've got all of these clients that are putting some of their health and well-being in my hands to some degree. And I've got 2 children, and I do feel a ton of responsibility to a lot of people. And sometimes I maybe anthropomorphize the plants too much, where I'm like, it died and it's my fault and I failed nature. So sometimes it's too activating for me to have a really big responsibility towards anything else.
Yep. Okay, then tea. Dried plants. The energy is still there, right? Mm-hmm. You can practice connecting that way. I was going to say, when I was younger and trying to figure out what I believed, and I inherently felt there was more than what we can see in the mundane world, but dogmatic religion wasn't a fit for me. I remember reading when, the singer Jewel, when she came out with her poetry book, there was a line in there about her church being the forest. And I was like, that's it. That is it. That is what I feel when I am in the woods.
Yeah. And I feel like that about movement and somatics, that like we are all of these individual creatures with a completely unique little ecosystem inside our bodies, and yet we're all participating in this similar shared intention towards or intention into. And I've definitely had some quite profound, emotionally gratifying moments teaching a somatics class where we're all just listening to a particular joint or bone or kinetic chain or something, and we're like, feel how like when this moves, it leans into this, and then your head gets this freedom off the spine, and we're all trying to feel it, and somebody's like, oh my God, and has a little revelation, and everybody feels it. Those are religious experiences for me.
You can find more of Alexandra at her website, www.alexandrabellerdances.org, and on Instagram at Alexandra Beller Dances. If you've enjoyed listening today, make sure that you subscribe so that you don't miss part 2 of the interview. And if you'd like to find more of us, you can do that by visiting our website, www.bloodmoonradio.com. As always, thank you for listening. And until next time, remember, the truth echoes louder after dark. Whispered, unfiltered, waiting to be touched. See you soon.